Welcome back to CVM Live. Time now for the major stories in detail. And we start with the Cornwall Regional Hospital. Leader of the opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips, is calling on the government to establish an independent commission of inquiry to examine the circumstances surrounding the illnesses reported by the staff of the hospital, to include a determination of the extent to which the medical and non-medical staff of the hospital have had their health compromised, the extent to which family members and patients of the hospital may have been affected, and the precise chemical or biological agents causing noxious fumes, and the reasons for the delays in the decision to evacuate the main building. The opposition leader says the composition of the commission should be determined on the recommendations of the membership of the professional organizations of the doctors and nurses, and using the expertise of the local academic institutions, University of the West Indies, UTEC, and the Northern Caribbean University. State Minister in the Ministry of Education, Rudyard Spencer, says we must make an investment in education to stem the cycle of crime and violence within our society. Here's Khadija Thomas with his report.
The State Minister says education is critical to correctional facilities as there is a tendency to treat prisoners as outcasts due to their past wrongs without recognizing that the institution is the place for redemption and rehabilitation.
Some may ask why waste resources on those who have committed crimes. And I would say, I don't think that it is wasted. And I don't think crimes were committed. I want to believe that mistakes were made.
He says the Jamaica Constabulary Force conducted a survey with over 800 inmates in 2012, which revealed that the majority had access to secondary level education.
However, more than 74% of them either dropped out or graduated with passing 6C with no subjects.
The minister adds that the Correctional Services Department conducted their research between 2013 to 2016 and discovered that 70% of those incarcerated were illiterate and poor readers. The minister says inmates must be provided with assistance in bettering themselves before they leave the correctional facility.
Do we want these inmates to succeed when they return to their communities? The only sensible answer must be yes. We want and expect those released will become law-abiding, tax-paying, contributing members of our communities.
He was speaking at the Fort Augusta Adult Correctional Center on Tuesday, where several computers were handed over. Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
And from Fort Augusta, we go to Rockfort, where several individuals descended on the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited's power plant in Rockfort, Kingston, earlier today. As CVM Live's Nicole Wilson reports, they were there to voice their displeasure over the treatment of a family member who they say was injured while carrying out the work for the JPS.
Every time we go to the hospital, they must sedate my son. Pay sedated with a tube that you can't talk.
And my brother, I'm watching back. I want justice. I'm telling this. The world feel this. I'm taste it. We can't keep it down.
That was the father and sister of O'Dane Wood voicing their frustration just outside of the Jamaica Public Service Company's power plant in Rockfort, Kingston. Wood reportedly sustained burns to 95% of his body, while allegedly carrying out work on behalf of the Jamaica Public Service Company on Friday, April 13. Some 2.5 weeks later, Wood is still in hospital and needs to go overseas for treatment. But that raises the question, who will cover these expenses? The family believes that this is the responsibility of JPS. Wood's mother, Anne-Marie Wood, says attempts at reaching officials from the company have thus proven futile.
We got up there to some man that Williams in there. When we got there, we had them give me a phone and we were there to talk to the secretary. While we were talking to the secretary, she was talking to the big man. In turn, I said to us, so we must go back to the plan and go back to the contractor. The contractor that called him, I know we don't see the contractor that will call him for the job.
According to the family's attorney, Kimani Brightson, they need to meet with the Light and Power Company to determine whether there is a contractual obligation to Wood.
We do not have any success whatsoever to communicate with any of these officials. They contact to hear by the family today to see if those negotiations will commence and be just represent the interest of the family and Mr. Mills. But as it is now, our priority is for him to receive medical treatment and everything else can come out.
Meanwhile, his mother Anne-Marie Wood says his condition is worsening.
The nurse said to us his body are deteriorating and them can't afford to get bed for, which is 3 weeks now. And there's no help, there's nothing. We don't know who forgot because we are called the APF, them now meet the demand, so we don't know what else to do.
CVM Live will continue to monitor the situation. Nicole Wilson, CVM Live.
Thanks, Nicole. Meanwhile, CVM Live contacted Director of Corporate Communications and Customer Experience at the Jamaica Public Service Company Limited, Winsome Callum. And she says there seems to have been a misunderstanding, but that has since been resolved.
I think there might have been some misunderstanding, which was cleared up today when we actually had a meeting with both parents and other representatives, including their lawyer. That meeting took place today at JPS, and I think whatever misunderstanding might have existed has now been clarified.
When asked about the responsibility of JPS in this case, she indicated that dialogue continues.
We have had discussions with the family, and there is a process that has to be observed with regards to who is responsible for what. And I think the family will be very, very satisfied now that they understand that process. So I'm not in a position to give any further detail except to say that JPS is in dialogue with the medical team, the company to which the gentleman is employed, as well as his family and his lawyer with regards to the next step in this case.
Well, today is May 1st, which means 31 days of affirming our children has begun with the launch of Child Month activities for the month of May at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency headquarters today. Here's Khadija Thomas again with this report.
From acknowledging the beauty in your children, telling them they are priceless, to reassuring your children of their inner strengths and abilities to succeed, by showing them how to identify the lessons within challenges, affirming your children will be made effective. The Child Month activities kick-started at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, with the Chief Executive Officer Rosalie Gage-Gray announcing a campaign.
The campaign will comprise 3 components: anti-bullying, ban the bullying campaign, #BTB, anti-corporal punishment, positive discipline, no spanking campaign, and the Protect Our Children, Protect We Picnic Them campaign.
Gage-Gray says the campaign will be geared at sensitization, realization and rehabilitation of past bullying experiences. This ties in with day 21 of the Child Month calendar, reiterates to every child the importance of treating others the same way they would like to be treated.
The objective would be to allow victims of bullying to address their bullying in a safe space to outline the ways in which they are targeted by the individual and how it affected them.
Guidance counselors and dispute resolution members will be involved in providing instruction to participants in the campaign. Gage-Gray says there's a need to engage Jamaicans in the Child Month activities.
We are launching a proactive campaign which seeks to provide parents with tips on how to protect their children and their neighbor's child, and we dare say all children.
Khadija Thomas, CVM Live.
And now for a CVM Live update. So the Trelawney police are concerned about the lack of white markings as well as reflectors on the Duncan's bypass in the parish. However, they do not attribute yesterday's fatal crash to the absence of these road safety aids, which are necessary for road users. Meanwhile, the police are circulating information regarding yesterday's deadly crash along the Duncan's bypass in Trelawney as they seek the public's assistance in identifying the bodies which were burnt beyond recognition. They will also be hoping the chassis number and other information about the car will help in leading to a positive identity about the driver, which could connect them to the passenger. The families of at least 3 persons are now plunged into mourning after the incident. Reports are about 1:45 yesterday afternoon, a Nissan Tida, which was heading in the direction of Falmouth, failed to keep left and subsequently collided with a Toyota Wish motorcar. The Toyota Wish motorcar was reportedly being operated as a taxi. The Nissan Tida reportedly burst into flames, killing the 2 occupants. After the blaze was extinguished, the charred remains of 2 bodies in the Nissan Tida motorcar were discovered. Education Minister Senator Ruel Reid says finalizing students should not find themselves deprived from completing their studies once they make the necessary arrangements with a tertiary institution to clear their outstanding balance. Here is Khadija Thomas again with this report.
Despite so many students still facing financial issues at tertiary institutions across the island, Education Minister Senator Ruel Reid notes that there are means and ways for these students to get assistance.
I noted interest also that this year there are some students, unfortunately, who find themselves challenged at the University of the West Indies in terms of finalizing. Last year, when we did our research, we discovered that a number of these students who found themselves in this particular dilemma had not sought to access the normal channels of support.
The minister says this assistance is available through the Student Loan Bureau, as well as the Labor Ministry's Program of Advancement through Health and Education.
We note in those many instances that they did not seek to apply for those particular facilities, including what we provide here at the Ministry, the JAMBAT program, which is a voluntary supported program where, as part of contributing 200 hours of voluntary service, the government would commit to fund up to $350,000 in tuition fees.
Minister Reid notes that the government had to intervene and a decision was made with the tertiary institutions.
The agreement was that if you had paid your fees up to the point of the semester proceeding and you're now finalizing and found yourself in financial distress, you just needed to convert that outstanding balance to a promissory note, a loan.
The Education Minister was speaking at the conference room at the Ministry of Education on Monday, where the Overseas Commission received $1.4 million from the Spanish Jamaica Foundation. Khadija Thomas, CVM Live. CVM Live.
Well, here's the hard-working Nicole Wilson, this time though with regional and international stories.
Let's start with news in St. Lucia. Another young male has lost his life to gun violence in the city, bringing the island's number of murders for 2018 up to 7. Here's more from HTS St. Lucia.
By this time last year, St. Lucia had already recorded number 21, on the way to a record 60 homicides for 2017. While this figure is 3 times the total for the corresponding period in 2018, one common thread remains. The perpetrator or victim was a young male. As Police Press Officer Corporal Ann Joseph reports, the RSLPF is currently investigating the circumstances surrounding the death of 30-year-old Dwayne William, a.k.a. Sozo, of Boaden, Jackmill.
And in Barbados, the Supreme Court complex remained a literal ghost town on Monday as cleaning began. The only people on duty were some security guards. In a Barbados Government Information Service release over the weekend, the public was informed that the cleaning of the files would begin at the start of this week. This following complaints by workers of respiratory issues, mold dropping from the ceiling, and other health concerns. Last week, National Union of Public Workers NUPW President Akani McDowell encouraged workers to stay away from the building. They were also informed that they could not be penalized under the Health and Safety Act for staying off.
Welcome back to CVM Live, your 90-minute news program. Your news authority is back with you. And of course, focus on St. James, the extension of the state of emergency, an issue that has occupied the political and public space. And we're still in a little bit of limbo with the opposition demanding a complete crime plan from the government. The opposition has rejected claims by the government, which blame them for the failed Tivoli 2010 extension of the state of emergency, which Prime Minister Andrew Holness has said is responsible for today's spike in murder. But this evening we zoom in on the divide in Parliament, remnants of last week's chaos and the state of emergency extension. We have an exciting panel. You will be excited. We have Marlon Morgan, government consultant, and Phoenicia Phillips, St. Andrew East caretaker and Papine councillor for the PNP.
Good evening.
Our favorite people, welcome back.
I hope we can live up to that being.
and we're not buttering you up. But you're the right people. Drama, excitement, theatrics. It seems as if our parliamentarians are majoring in either publicity stunts or something completely different than looking with seriousness at the nation's business. We saw it in Parliament on the Coronal Regional issue. Now, we're seeing what some people feel are a lot of red herrings with regard to why crime is up, why the state of emergency is or is not working, why we have spikes in murder outside of the state of emergency, and whether or not we should really extend the state of emergency in St. James in light of the fact that crime is 66% down. I mean, how could that even be an argument, Marlon?
Well, I mean, we certainly in the government embrace the cut and thrust of our democracy and, more importantly, the Parliament as a forum for debate and engagement. It was good to see that the House made amends. Certainly the members would have apologized to the nation that, amends was made in respect of last week's poor showing. But suffice it to say, at present, government is seized of what its obligations and responsibilities to the people of Jamaica are. Chief among them being, an orderly and peaceful society where crime is low. The truth of the matter is a number of things are happening as we speak. I would have seen a segment just now with former National Security Minister, Mr. Bunting, on the set, and he spoke about the numbers game. And I concur with that in terms of the importance of having more men and women available to do policing and maintain a presence, particularly in some of the troubled areas. But the government is addressing that because at present we have no fewer than 3 batches of men and women in training at the UWI, at Harman Barracks, and at Twickenham Park. And that will all go well for ramping up the numbers in the forces and, of course, helping us to meet the establishment.
Venetia, Marlon is agreeing with former Security Minister Peter Bunting, who says that what we need is an enhanced security presence in these hotspots that are flaring up, despite the fact that we have zones of special operations and states of emergency over there in St. Catherine and St. James. But how do you feel? What is the opposition's position?
I believe that there is not a single Jamaican who would disagree with the position that we definitely need more resources for the JCF. That is a matter that is impatient of debate. Resources is not just material. It is also human resources. Boots on the ground that is to be expected. The reality of the situation is, though, I believe that what we should not allow is for the government to create any kind of distraction or deflection from the fact that they have not come up with a crime plan, a plan that would have seen over time the kind of...
So just where's the deflection and distraction, though? Just curious.
First of all, a lie does not become true because you tweet it or repeat it all the time. And so, for example, when you go to the tit for tat to say, had you supported the extension in 2010, we would not have been here today. That, of course, you would appreciate is a load of nonsense, absolute nonsense. You could not have had a state of emergency prolonged over 8 years.
But Anthony Clayton was here saying, though, that we missed a golden opportunity in 2010 when we did not continue the state of emergency.
And you know what? We will differ on that for many reasons. I believe coming into that, what we saw coming certainly out of the PNP administration was some kind of strategy to deal with crime. If you think about what Ellington as commissioner was doing at the time, as a result of that, we had the anti-gang legislation coming on. I remember it was, I think, Police Area 4. The name, I might have it mangled a little bit, but they had this counter gang group out of Area 4 because Area 4 at the time accounted for probably the larger number in terms of criminal activity across the country. And so what you had was the fugitive team and the counter gang team working together out of Area 4 as a part of a strategy. Now, when you look at, for example, a state of emergency and the kind of human resources that are required, how many police are we using, or police and soldier per day? 300 maybe? Or nothing less than that for sure. If in just the area covered. Now, you're talking about then some 8,000 for the month. Out of what? For the JCF alone, 12,000 plus? It is crazy. That does not include, by the way, the regular policing that they have to do on a daily basis in areas like those. And we shouldn't play games with stuff like that.
It is not sustainable. But
the
government says it's not sustainable. Marlon, yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, the government has not proposed that the state of emergency or enhanced security measures nor ZOSO shall be permanent features in terms of our crime management thrust. The truth of the matter is that the numbers on the ground in relation to law enforcement is considerably augmented at present by the JDF. So of the 9,000 or so men and women that we have in the JCF, are we seeking to get to 12,000 and then to perhaps 15,000 in terms of an optimal number. But the JDF, the military is out and the citizens out, certainly in the impacted communities, the impacted spaces, welcome them. If we were to look at two undeniable realities, the gun is the weapon of choice in most murders here in Jamaica. And not only that, the gang activity essentially accounts for a number of the murders that we have, certainly going back the longest while. Clearly, it means that it must be a strategic imperative to so organize yourself and so deploy the military and the JCF to ferret out these gangsters and disrupt the gangs. So the observation the Prime Minister was making, and he's quite right, and it is for that reason why erudite people like Professor Anthony Clayton of the UWI would concur with him, is that at a point in 2010 when we had the criminals on the retreat, the security forces were in the ascendancy, the criminals were on the retreat, but there was a let-up because there was not political support across the line from the then opposition PNP.
Can I just say, you see, I would hope that you and I would not actually justify Ashley's statement, when she spoke to the theatrics and all the other things that are happening with our peers elsewhere. Because the people of Jamaica are depending on us to bring some clarity to this. Let's start with accepting that it was the unwillingness of the government of the day, led by Bruce Golding, right, to extradite Dudus that got us to the place where a state of emergency was required. Now, that having had the state of emergency then, right, what we saw when the operations in Tivoli happened, we saw the numbers shortly thereafter trending down. You did not at that time require an extension. Certainly when Bruce Golding spoke, go back to his thing, I found it today online, where he said that to his mind, there was some kind of criminal migration. He made the argument for Clarendon, for example. So are you suggesting to me on here tonight, Marlon, that when you said that we missed that golden opportunity in 2010, are you suggesting then that the criminals out of Tivoli Gardens and West Kingston made their way into what, Montego Bay? So hold on a second, because I'd like to account for those who came to Augustown. Do we need a state of emergency there? I'd like to account for those who went to Southside.
Marlon, not to spend too long on this point, because we have a lot of substantive to get through. But we must also highlight that two things. When the Prime Minister was in opposition, he said that it was the government's responsibility, regardless of what had occurred in the past, to address the crime problem and take a bipartisan approach as a national issue. Secondly, at the time when there was to be an extension of the 2010 Tivoli state of emergency, 6 JLP government members of parliament were absent.
And I gather a couple may have been traveling. But so let us come back to...
How important was it? And should we even be talking about it when we can be looking at the long-term effect
fair enough. So if you'll allow me to address that. Criminals, as we know it, are mobile, and there's no well-thinking supporter of the government, nor well-thinking Jamaican that can deny that the extradition, the handling of the then extradition request was poor. Yeah, so that would have triggered the need to have called a state of emergency. But what we cannot deny is that 2010 state of emergency had a kind of shock and awe effect, where it had the criminals on the run. You saw the police making the recommendation, well, the police announcing persons of interest, and a number of persons presented themselves to law enforcement pursuant to the police's request. And one of the important things to realize is that the business of a state of emergency is something that stems from the competent authorities in the matter, being the security forces. So for Venetia to suggest that there was no need to have extended, that was not a determination of wholeness at the time, as House Leader at the time, or Golding at the time. It was the police that made that request.
Can we get past this?
But it was the police that made that request.
Richard, before we get past it, Richard, I beg your pass, or some immunity. Marlon, Shouldn't the Prime Minister have said, and let's just do away with the tribalism, and let's do away with the red herring so we can focus on the country's business. Shouldn't the Prime Minister have said, without tribalism, without the theatrics, that we, the JLP government, and in partnership with the People's National Party opposition, in 2010, missed a golden opportunity? Would not that have supported his plea for a unified approach to crime today?
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister could have extricated the JLP as the then government from that position. But the core argument, the core point he was making is that having regard to how controversial that state of emergency was, you needed, and it's critical to appreciate that you needed bipartisan support in the matter. So that's a substantive point he was making.
So can we get past the 8 years ago? I just want to get to the crime.
But can we just clarify one point for the people of Jamaica, though? Because, you see, you shouldn't get away with a slap on the wrist on that. What he tried to do, certainly through social media, was to suggest or to blame the PNP, which you must accept and say to the people of Jamaica that based on our constitutional provisions at the time, there was absolutely no need.
That's not what Bruce Golding was trying to do at the time, Venetia.
No, I know, but what Prime Minister Holness was trying to say to the people of Jamaica is, listen to me, it is their fault.
So Marlon, so we can jump over this hoop. Yeah, Marlon, I think what Venetia is asking from you, as a prominent member of the Jamaican Labour Party, can you agree or disagree? Was it the right stance, was it politically mature of the Prime Minister, who is leading the country as the maximum standard bearer and defender, to say, to politicize this issue?
Well, I do not concur with the observation that the Prime Minister has politicized the issue. The Prime Minister has an obligation and would be well advised to call it as he sees it. And he's particularly spot on in lamenting the fact that we had a golden opportunity at a point in time, but we didn't up the ante because there was not the bipartisan.
I think we're debating an 8-year-old point one.
Right.
And I think
but it's important for context and for historical purposes.
No, for truth.
I think and of course for truth. Because I don't reside
from truth. 6 of his members were absent from Parliament, and it did not require the support of the PNP.
So let me just say it very simply. I think the Prime Minister was tweeting very simply to make a political point to kind of push the opposition for supporting the state of emergency in 2018. And that's all it was. But I want to get back to the crime plan, which is the more substantive thing. The Prime Minister promised to have a crime plan at the end of April.
Well, first of all, Ashley, in an earlier question, raised the point as to whether it was responsible for the Prime Minister to go down the road he went. I'll tell you what is responsible. It is very responsible to have reconvened the Vale Royal talks, albeit the first one having been staged at the regional headquarters at UWI. It is very responsible to signal to the opposition that, listen, we're at a juncture where we need to up the ante and keep the pressure on the criminals. And as such, let us not send or telegraph the wrong things to them. Let them not be of a mind to suggest that they can wait us out. Let them understand that we're in it for the long haul. We are resolved as a political directorate, meaning both government and opposition, in getting this done once and for all for the people of Jamaica. In respect to the crime plan, that is well underway. The Prime Minister spoke a few weeks ago, if not a couple months ago, to an important thing. He doesn't want the business of a crime plan, when promulgated, to become a political football or the subject of rancor or animosity, as we have seen so many other things being. What he wants is for a degree of consensus so that we can distill what the key issues are, identify what the strategic imperatives are, and work with fixity of purpose in pursuing those. Government and opposition.
Marlon, you have the final 30.
It has been the practice of this Prime Minister to come up with smoke screens. No, come up with smoke screens. So, for example, when Jamaicans were crying out, we heard a grand announcement of Zozo that has failed miserably.
But Kerry
we
Thomas,
are yet, hold on a second,
Kerry
we are yet...
Mount Salem says another thing.
Hold on, no. Marlon, we probably need to sit down. Actually, maybe that's for another program, to sit down and examine properly Zozo and the cost of Zozo to the people of Jamaica. We also need to be talking about the cost of the state of emergency.
Well, you're in Augustown. Kerry is over in Mount Salem.
We need to Zozo in our state of emergency,
so
but we're dealing with it.
But who should we believe?
Because we have come up with our own plan. No thanks to the Prime Minister, we've come up with our own plan and it's working. The police are able, if you sit with them, Ashley, if it is not broken, don't fix it. Ellington, whether or not we want to do so, we must give him credit. There were some programs, the kind of intelligence-driven policing that was happening in a way that saw us reduce crime.
And we commend that to the security
You
forces.
have both compelled us as usual, and you, of course, have whet the appetites of those persons at home for a part 2, and we'll be ready for you, and so will the viewers at home. Thank you for coming, CVM Live. Our very rambunctious panel.